Live. Okay, welcome everybody to the Monkey Bar. Today we have some very special guests with us. Very special guests. You want to tell us who you are?
Sure. I am Timothy Lim. I am the creator and artist behind Black Ops and Common America, and a slew of other projects with my co-creator and writer, Mark Pellegrini.
Yo, I'm Mark Pellegrini, and like Tim said, I'm the co-creator and the writer on Black Ops and Common America and Walmite. Also got a prose story, a weird fiction story that's going to be showing up in Cursova Magazine Summer Edition, and that's pretty much where I'm at.
Well, Mark, it sounds like you and Zach are going to have a lot to talk about this
I saw the button.
There's a story behind that. Zach, you want to go over that story?
Yeah, we are part of a physical writers group. We had a conference, and there was a guy there.
Yeah, this was a couple years back
ago. And what he did, or what we had to do, was we would bring in our first page. Was it just one page?
Yeah, it was a first page panel to see it, because these were it was a panel of three what do you call them, agents, and they were. We would submit them for review that day, and they would give us feedback on whether they would go forward with it, whether they deemed it would hook the reader. Basically, kind of like American Idol for writers. This day.
Here's your elevator pitch, right? They read the first page and they see if it grabs them or not.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And the first page was by a friend of mine. I didn't care about that. One of his critiques was weird fiction is not a genre because he's never heard of it.
Oh, them's fighting words.
Yeah. I was really tempted to go out and find some H.P. Lovecraft. I can't think of any other writers off the top of my head because I'm tired. I apologize.
Yeah, but you were really adamant about that.
I was. I rose my hand twice, 3 times.
And this guy was kind of this know-it-all. He was the Simon Cowell of that panel, basically.
So he probably considers weird fiction to be illegitimate because it's not Shakespeare, it's not Dickens, so it doesn't count as literature. That kind of person.
Or he just didn't he was adamant that. Yeah. But yeah, that's
the kind of writer who would look at my writing and burst into flames.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'd ask that guy to sit down and read just anything by Robert E. Howard or Clark Ashton Smith or Robert Bloch and, say with a straight face that it's not any good. See what he thinks. Or Richard Matheson, geez, one of the big brains behind the Twilight Zone. I mean, half of his work qualifies as weird fiction. And yeah. That guy's behind the curve, whoever he was. I hate him. I don't know who he is, but I hate him already.
And it became this joke between weird fiction. Whenever someone would bring it up, we'd have to mention the story.
But the reason behind the button is I remember you saying, next time, if he ever comes back, you would wear a button that said weird fiction and sit in the front row. This is spite him. That's where it comes from.
It's like those buttons that I had to wear when I worked at a Blockbuster Video. The button is huge and it's on my chest and it says ask us about our rewards card program. Ask me about weird fiction. I'm sorry, Tim. We're leaving you out of this conversation, my bad.
Oh, I'm just listening. I'm tuned in. I'm a guest, so I'm waiting for questions or whatever.
Yeah. I was going to, if I had known for sure that you guys were going to be here, I would have done a different thumbnail. But because I wanted to be, I said, I thought you guys weren't going to show up, so I was going to talk mostly about my experience playing Mother 3, the game, and how I don't know if you guys are familiar with that and its background.
Mother 3? No,
yeah.
I haven't heard of it.
Okay, it's the sequel to Earthbound.
Oh, okay.
Is that the one that never got released in the U.S.? That was the one that was on Game Boy Advance or whatever?
Yeah, the one on Game Boy Advance. Fans eventually had to translate it for themselves. I played that version. And as much as everybody talks about how great it is, it's really not that great, especially compared to Earthbound.
Yeah, I mean, I've never played an Earthbound game just because, I mean, I'm sure they're good. It's just that RPGs, Japanese-style RPGs just aren't my genre. when it comes to video games, like Final Fantasy, things like that. You know, there's the Fire Emblem games. I'm really not into those. Though it is kind of weird that Nintendo keeps releasing the Fire Emblem games in the U.S., but not the Earthbound games that have a bit more of a legacy and a bit more popularity here.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas nobody in the U.S. gives a crap about Fire Emblem, yet they keep putting them out here.
Yeah, I think they're trying to. Sorry, go ahead, Zach.
I always think the Mother 3 thing is like, because we never got it, it makes it mysterious and special.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like you can't have it, so suddenly now you really want it, and it's all you can think about.
Yeah, and the connection to Reggie is that Reggie Fils-Aimé, people were like campaigning to get Mother 3 released, and so they would like mass email him, and it became a meme over time. Eventually, he was like, it eventually got to a point where he was, I think he voiced himself in that Robot Chicken short, where he like shoots fire at one of the fan in the front audience asking about him. And I think that was like a E3 short, if I remember. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was this big thing that's really, like, if you've played, like, I've played Mother 3 finally to the end, and I knew most about the plots, and just, I don't know, I think it's, like, to boil my opinion down, is that it's has better gameplay, but like story is bad. It's not very good. It kind of wastes your time, and it just has modal themes. And the story was the big selling point for Earthbound, because I'm sort of iffy on JRPGs myself, but Earthbound it's one of the rare cases where the gameplay, like the story, saves the like lackluster gameplay. Where I would say that Earthbound has actually kind of influenced me as a writer. And if you've ever looked up, like, one of the best companion pieces to Earthbound is there's this series of short films called Earthbound Saga, which a bunch of kids, like 10 years ago now, but they all like did these 4 little movies leading up to a certain point in the game, where they eventually I guess they just got jobs and moved on from that. But it's really, if you like low budget kind of stuff, like I don't know if you've ever seen Doug TeNaples' short film Sock Baby.
Tim, have you seen that? I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
I know that a lot of our frequent friends who are on his channel, they rave about it. It's free to watch on YouTube.
Yeah, so is Earthbound Saga. I actually, like, one of my most prized possessions is they did a limited time DVD collection of the first of the 4 episodes, and also like some lengthy behind the scenes stuff. And it's really, really interesting from like a filmmaking standpoint, and just I don't know. I've gushed about these guys in the past. They're called Upsy Movies, the guys that made it. And they were just like kids fresh out of high school when they like did that stuff. And it's all like this really like dumb but charming production stuff behind it, where it's like in order to get the Ness costume, they literally had like a baseball cap that they put red duct tape over, and like the shirt they have like duct tape over to make the stripes. It's just like, and like the robot that they're supposed to fight is just a trash can with a cardboard box over it. It's like really charming stuff like that I like a lot. But enough about.
Love movies that have a lot of.
Sorry, go ahead, Zach.
I love when you can see the enthusiasm in the movie.
Yeah,
I love that a lot.
Mm-hmm. So I'd highly recommend Earthbound Saga. But enough about me and what I like. Let's go on to. I got a bunch of stuff written down for Tim at the last minute because the Indiegogo for Common America is still ongoing right now.
Yeah, for the next week, 7 more days.
Yeah, and I managed to get the Kickstarter one with the figurine.
Oh, cool. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Let's see.
If I had a little bit more money, I would definitely pick up that one.
Mm-hmm.
I would use as a little D&D miniature.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but Common America is probably one of the most enjoyable comics I've read in the past couple of years. Nice. It reminds me a lot... the art especially reminds me of Darwin Cook. You're familiar with him?
Mm-hmm. I know Darwin Cook. I actually have his. I have the DC, the New Frontier, and his the Spirit series that he did.
Oh yeah, I have the DC New Frontier collection, and I think the first Spirit book they did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see that in your art, and also kind of like fused with anime too. Studio Trigger.
A little bit, because for example, actually Studio Trigger almost like 100%. Darwin Cook, even though I own his works, he was actually not a major influence as far as stylistically.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. But then again, I think it all goes hand in hand, because I think Studio Trigger definitely is inspired by American artists. So it wouldn't surprise me if Darwin Cook, Bruce Timm, Ty Templeton, all these guys were kind of an influence on them, and then in a roundabout way, Trigger was an influence on me.
I might be thinking more like tone-wise.
Sure.
America, because it does have that optimistic Silver Age Renaissance feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good enough. Like it has its own thing going for it too. It's not just remember this era of comics. I like that it has this sort of like moving forwards view to it.
Yeah,
we did want it to be a modern comic, but we didn't want it to be like modern cynicism,
right?
Which is what most comics are. So it does have that optimistic attitude of older comics, but we also wanted to set it, in a contemporary sort of story setting.
Right.
You didn't want it to be weighed down by a lot of the stuff that modern comics are held back by.
Yeah, no,
I think
we get most of that kind of like craps and giggles kind of thing. We get that out of our system and doing like the Walmart books, which obviously aren't for everybody. But Common America was something that we wanted it to have substance, but we also wanted it to have appeal to as many people as possible, and not to feel like it's on one side of the aisle or the other.
Right.
And we've been getting good responses from people on both sides of the aisles, so I think it worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even Walmart, it doesn't have that, like, it's a good kind of satire in that it's not like I don't know what the word is, like aggressive with it. It has a sort of it's more of a winking sort of like satire to it. I find it's not like we want you to believe this thing.
And the other thing about it is that ironically enough, the word Trump is never uttered once in any of those books, and it's also I think the most flattering criticism or commentary that we get is people can't tell if we're making fun of the president or if we're on his side. And I think that that's a source of good humor. For example, you watch like the 90s Saturday Night Live or even the 80s, they used to make fun of presidents all the time. And you would get to that point where you can't even tell the politics of the actors, because if a joke is funny, it's funny no matter what. And I think that was the thing about Trump. That was actually, and I'm not the writer, so I can't speak to it, but what makes him easy to write or make a caricature of is he is a living caricature. He's so over the top that you can look at him, and if you hate him, you're like, that guy's a buffoon. But if you love him, you're like, oh my gosh, that was the ultimate troll move. And so Mark got to the point where he was like, after you watch enough rallies, hear his patter, you just kind of get who he is as a character, and it works for humor because you don't have to try in terms of trying to elicit that response. And I had this one guy, it was at the Wichita Falls Comic Expo around October of last year, and he came up and he was like, hey man, I'm so glad that you're here. Like, do you have a copy of Walmart? Because I wasn't able to get it when it was on the campaign. I said, yeah, here we have some copies. He actually bought 3 because he's like, yeah, I got 2 friends and they're clerks in the law firm. It turns out the guy was like a lawyer, or I don't know if he was like a full-fledged lawyer or just one of the interns there, but he was definitely like high up. And so we got to talking, and we're talking about the economy, and I could tell he was not a conservative. Like, I could tell he was definitely on the left, and he was like, man, I'm glad that you guys are sticking to it, man. You gotta keep that guy in his place. And I didn't say anything differently to him. He just walked off, and I just thought, that guy just has no idea, but that's okay, because it shows that Mark's writing is good enough that even if you're on the left, you can find humor in it because you're going to interpret it in a way that you feel like is, I guess, more in tune with your narrative or your worldview.
Unfortunately,
I
Mark,
lean a little to
I was going to say, unfortunately, Mark, you're not a real comic writer, because real comics shouldn't be political.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, is that we need to stop doing those Trump books, shame on us. But we just have so much fun doing them. And it's like Tim said, that Donald Trump, the actual human being, he's got so much personality, and he's got such a strange and crazy history, be it in entertainment, in real estate, and business, that he's easy to pick on because he's so lively and so interesting a human being. And I think one of the reasons, I mean, there are multiple reasons why there was like the Obama administration was just 8 years devoid of humor directed at it. I mean, partially is because of bias, but the other thing is just Obama was just a boring person. He didn't have any personality. He just, there was nothing to really poke fun at other than the fact that he was just really boring and lame. And there's just nothing about him that was something that you could crank up to 11 and get a lot of humor out of. Whereas Trump, it's so easy. The jokes write themselves.
Yeah. With Obama, I would say like the only thing I can think of is him trying to be the cool president.
Yeah, that too. I mean, when he's like trying to jazz sing, you know, on not on SNL, on like the Tonight Show or something, you're just kind of like cringing and oh, geez.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was just kind of sad when he was doing things like that. You know, everybody laughs at Jeb Bush for his please clap moment, but I feel like Obama's whole 8 years was a please clap moment.
Yeah.
It's always come to me that. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
When you're talking about Trump, you kind of nailed the thing on the head. Truth is always stranger than fiction, you know? I've come to terms with that. Especially watching, like, Tiger King, for example. Stuff like that. I thought you couldn't make up crazy people anymore. Turns out, nope, they're still around.
Well, I mean, people, you know, used to think it was ridiculous that Ronald Reagan had a career in acting before he went into politics, and that you could go on video or turn on the TV and find, you know, Bedtime for Bonzo or a Western or an old movie that stars the president. And everyone kind of thought that was ridiculous. But, you know, nowadays you can just go on YouTube and you can find clips of, you know, WWE SmackDown with the president in it, you know, fighting with Vince McMahon, or you can find commercials for Pizza Hut with the president in it. And it's just so crazy and out there. It's everything Ronald Reagan, but cranked up, you know, to a 20. And it's just the premise, just the existence of this by itself is funny. And that obviously just leans to making the humor very, very easy, which is one of the things that I'm very disappointed in mainstream comedy, when there's so much material they could work with, because it's such low-hanging fruit and so easy, but they go for things like Drumpf, 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 or Two Scoops, or things like that. And like, really? That's what you're going for? He was on SmackDown.
It's like anything to make him not look good.
Yeah.
But what's the next project you guys are working on?
We're working on Black Ops 3. So Mark got me the finalized script yesterday, but I started on it more than a week ago. The way we normally work is between a comic, there'll be a week of kind of downtime. I gotta get caught up with commissions that people have been waiting like 2 months plus for me to do. So I do that for a week. And it's also good because I can unwind, because, you know, when you're drawing a page a day nonstop, I mean, you're on this time schedule, and it does get really, really stressful, especially towards the end, because you just want to get it done and over with. And then after that, we enter what's called I call it my pre-production process. I make new character sheets for everyone. I have like a stylistic schizophrenia where I can't stick with one style consistently. I'm always tweaking and changing things over and over again. So for Black Ops 3, once again, the characters all get an overhaul. So they get new designs, new character models, new ways I draw them, new palettes for the color sheets and everything like that. And in that period, I got it done sooner than I thought. So I just told Mark, hey, give me the script, whatever you got right now, so I can start doing the pages. And right before we went live, I just wrapped up page 8. So we're almost done.
You're already on page 8?
Yeah, so we're already going to have a sixth of the book done by the end of the week. So that's good. I like keeping a time schedule. I like knowing I'm cranking out the pages. And then he gave me the last few pages last night. I gave it a read over. Everything looks, I think we're like 98% there. And for the changes, he's not really going to know until I send him the final draft, and he'll just have to tell me what he thinks about it. But we're on schedule for that to be out by early to mid-June. So that's assuming that everything is going as planned. And then after that, we immediately go into Common America 2 to wrap up the year in terms of our schedule of books.
So the way the way our process works is that while he's drawing the last book, I'm writing the next book, so that by the time he's done drawing that book, that script is ready and he can go straight into that, and then I can start writing the next script. So we're always in tandem with each other, like a relay race, passing that baton back and forth. So there's never really any downtime, which means that now that I've sent in the Black Ops 3 script, I got to get started on the Common America 2 script. So we're always busy.
That's good. That's something I've been meaning to get. Like I've had trouble sticking to a schedule, and I don't know if Zach, if you feel the same way, where it's like it's kind of difficult to be your own boss. I know that I know that Doug recently said, he's like his own like worst or best like a very strict boss to himself.
Mm-hmm.
Like my inner boss is kind of like, I'll just get around to it eventually, whatever. I don't really care. He's just like the worst boss for me. I'm my own worst boss, I guess. I've been trying to like get like a method going to where I'm able to sit down for like several hours a day, or at least 5 hours a day, and get writing and drawing a comic. Like, because I'm working on a project right now that's taken 2 years to refine, and I think I'm in the 7th draft of the first chapter. After bringing it to Pocket Jacks, I had a sort of a wake up call, and now it's like a major revision right now. So it's a bit discouraging, but again, like, any advice you have on sticking to a schedule and that stuff?
Yeah, my advice is just to do it. So
Right.
Don't even look at the quality of the work. You just have to do it. Mark and I give this is like our prime piece of advice, because you always hear practice makes perfect, and doesn't really mean anything, because we've had a friend, and he's not really our friend anymore. It's a long story after 2016, but he would just draw like the same thing all the time, and he never got better. And so that's one of those cases where it's not just the practice that you need to do, but it's also the idea that you have to be committed to something to the point where as you go along, you see the improvement, because it becomes less of you trying and more of just an exercise, just like anything. If you notice people who do weightlifting or bodybuilding or go to the gym, it's just being able to put in the hours and then doing it. I think a lot of times what happens is people get so self-conscious with the work itself that they measure themselves by that, and then they get discouraged, because, for example, it's kind of like when you weigh yourself. So if you're working out, if you weigh yourself every day, it's like the watch pot never boils type thing, where it's like, oh my gosh, I weighed 180 today, and now I weigh 180.1. Oh, and then now I weigh 180 again. Well, it's like, quit measuring yourself like that. Do the work, and then like week by week, you look at your weight, and you can see your gains or your losses or whatever. But I know from a writing point of view, I know that Mark writes every day, regardless of whether it's a script or just an editorial or whatever. And for me, for drawing, it was like that too. But here's what happened with me. So when we were working in merchandising, my very first week, they said, here's how many hours we expect you to work. And by the way, that equals to like 1 design a day. So have fun. If you don't do that, we're pretty much going to fire you like really fast. So the first day, I was like, holy cow, it's not even about the quality, it's about the speed. Can I get a design done in an 8-hour period? And just by churning out design after design, I wasn't even looking at, oh my gosh, is this good or not? It was more like, you have no choice. You have to spend 8 hours working on this, and you're going to be timed. So it's almost like a speed contest. See what you can do. And it got to the point where, honestly, I'm actually glad that we started doing comics when we did, because even 5 years ago, there's no way I could work with the efficiency I have now. I would be too busy thinking about, oh, does this arm look right? Oh, did I draw this deer's head correctly? And now it's just to the point where it's almost just a technical feat, where I'm just having to sit there, and it's just doing a series of mathematical calculations in terms of, okay, well, if I do it at this angle with this proportion, then that's how I can fit everyone into this panel. So I'm not having to sweat and think about it, but it's just because it was just basically rote practice on a daily basis and forcing yourself to do it. And don't even look back at the quality of your work. You can look back maybe in a week or a month or a year, but if you commit to just the timetable, then the rest just kind of does itself.
And yeah, I mean, with writing, you're talking about being your own boss and deadlines. And I'm the kind of person I do need deadlines, just because if I set like a hard date for myself, that note lets me know how long I have and how I need to pace my work out for how many pages I need to produce a day, so that I have all the pages ready by a certain point. And Tim, because he does a page a day, he can give me a projection of when he's going to be done drawing the comic, so that I'll know when he needs the script for the next comic. So if he's doing a 60-page book, I'll just assume that's 60 days. So that gives me 60 days to write the next comic. Which should be easy, but that also includes the pre-production stuff where I've got to work on the story Bible, I've got to develop the plot summary, the page breakdowns, and then I got to write the pages. But I can get that done in 60 days, and I'll know that if how many pages I need to do a day in order to meet that deadline, and I can get it done. And when Tim said, don't worry about the quality of the book per se, it's that you get better every time you do it. And if you overanalyze your own work and you just keep, scrapping it and starting over, eventually you're never going to have anything to show for all your efforts, because you're never putting anything out there, you're never publishing. Mm-hmm. And that in itself can be discouraging. You kind of just have to know that the first thing you put out there, it might get mixed responses, it might get positive responses, but as the creator, you're going to be your harshest critic. You're always going to look back at your previous work and go like, oh, why did I do it that way? I should have done it this way, because you've learned, you've improved, you've gotten better. I mean, I look at the script I wrote for Black Ops 1, and I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't, written this scene this way, or I wish I hadn't done the dialogue this way or the narration this way. There's way too much text on this scene. How did Tim fit it all in? Like, oh, this, that. And those are all things that I improved for Black Ops 2. But now that I finished Black Ops 3, and I'll go back and look at Black Ops 2, I'm like, oh, why did I do that? And it's always going to be that way. You're always going to look at your older work once you've gotten better and see all the shortcomings. And you'll probably hate it more than anybody else out there, because there's a lot of people who love Black Ops 1 and still love it. And I'm proud of it. But I can still see, the shortcomings are where I could have done things better, and I always will. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad piece of work. It just means I'm my own harshest critic. But the fact of the matter is, I got it out there, and Tim got it out there, and we've been improving with each volume that we've put out and all the other projects we've done. And we'll continue to grow and improve as we get more work out there.
Yeah, that's good advice. Zach, you have any input?
I really like the hard deadline thing. I need to start doing that again. I used to. When I stopped, that's when I started entering the slump. Mm-hmm. I apologize.
And I know that I actually have like a room in my apartment that I just have like this big drawing table in. I've been I did this a month ago, was locking myself in there for like an hour and seeing what I could come up with. No phone, no computer, just a pencil and paper. And I did manage to get some stuff done. It's just that I think that I don't know, I need to start locking myself out of Twitter again. Like, all this information overload is just making me forget all this good advice.
Yeah, and that can be a hard thing, especially, is when you're writing, you're using like a Word program, you're typing on your computer, and you're always one click away from Twitter or YouTube or a distraction. Yes. And while sometimes you do need to just rest your eyes and rest your brain and just take a minute, that minute can turn into hours, if you lose track of things. And it's very easy to lose your rhythm and to get distracted by something, and all of a sudden you're not hitting you're not meeting your quota for the day. And so the very first writing job I ever had was back in 2007, and I was hired by a website company because they're putting out a whole bunch of blogs for like pop culture reviews and insights and crap like that. I don't think the company even exists anymore. And I remember it was my first writing job, and my boss who hired me, because I was working from home, just said, yeah, just write whatever, and then I'll review what you wrote for the day. And that's it. He didn't give me like a word count quota or a page quota or an article quota. And I remember for like the first month, I wasn't producing enough because I didn't know how much was enough, and I wasn't getting the information I needed. And but that was my first job, was 2007, and I've done personal writing and I've done professional writing since then, and obviously with more practice and more discipline, I've gotten it down to, I will write, if the page breakdown for the script says this scene is 5 pages, I'll write 5 pages that day, and I will see that scene through to the end so I don't lose my rhythm no matter how long it takes, and I make sure to get that chunk done that day. And I feel accomplished with what I've done.
Yeah, that is good. And one more question about comic stuff. I saw recently Webtoon. They're apparently that Crunchyroll original stuff.
Mhm.
One of them is a Webtoon anime adaptation, Tower of God. I think that's what it's called.
Luke was talking about that last night on the Bunderdome. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was what you were talking about, Satina.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I should remember that was just last night. I was watching the whole thing. But if you got approached to have an anime adaptation of one of your comics, which one would you want it to be?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I think honestly, I think Common America is more suited for it, but I think that.
Yeah, I know that Common America has the anime turnarounds in the back.
Right. I think that even though I think that would be more suited for it, I think Black Ops would be more interesting. I think the concept of Black Ops is more unique, just in terms of something that we created, kind of as it is out of whole cloth, and we have an underdog character. But I mean, that would be my personal pick.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of hard to look at objectively, because we've put more into Black Ops than we have Common America, because we're on volume 3 of Black Ops and we've only produced 1 volume of Common America so far. So the Black Ops world, its characters, it's richer to us. We've got an extensive story Bible put together. Tim has done tons of artwork that most people have never seen, just as developmental materials. So we feel more confident about that universe. But Common America, I mean, I'm not going to lie, that's our most successful crowdfund to date. I think it hits, it hit a vibe with people that Black Ops, even though Black Ops was really, really well received and very successful, it wasn't as successful as Common America. And so I would think that if we were approached, which one we would use, I think just for the appeal to the mass market, we would probably go with Common America. But currently, my heart rests with Black Ops. But we'll see. The more Common America volumes I put out, that might change.
Right. It's funny. I had the exact same sort of mindset with my comics. I know that I've been going back and forth between one idea and another, like 2 different projects. One is exactly what you say with Black Ops, is that it's the more fully realized world, the one you're more passionate about. And for me, I'm like, it's not as concrete an idea though as this other one that's more like a Hellboy style, superhero, not really superhero, but kind of in the vein of Hellboy, of paranormal fighter guy fights paranormal creatures. That there's more of a I guess succinct description rather than it's this big world and all this stuff is going on, and I don't know, that's kind of how I see it. Is that I've been just one of the reasons that these projects have been on hold is I'm just going back and forth between which one do I really want to do, which one.
Well, and it brings up kind of a philosophical quandary too, which is just because something means something to you and you're passionate about it, does that mean that it has less merit because it's not as well received, or because it doesn't have the mass market appeal? I mean, it's like Common America, honestly, it had such a low budget. Our budget was only $2,000 because there's only 2 guys working on it. It's just Mark and I, so we didn't sink much money into it. All of our money basically went into paying Genzo Men for the colors, and then Sashi for some of the other supplemental pinups, and then Cute Sexy Robots for the back cover. So we actually did it on 1/4 of the budget of the Black Ops books, and yet our profit margin was so huge. And I honestly did not expect it to be that big. I thought it was going to be kind of a niche type thing. And so people are like, we want Common America. And I'm just like, but we have Black Ops, and Black Ops is a much richer universe.
Once you put something out there in the wild, it gains a life and attraction all of its own that you can't control. So, what you not necessarily what you sink, you know, all of your you put all your eggs in that basket isn't going to be the one that necessarily is the one that people pick up. And even though we love both properties, so I mean, it's like Anthony Burgess. He's the author of A Clockwork Orange. He didn't want to be known primarily as the author of A Clockwork Orange because he hated that book and he was ashamed of it. But it ended up becoming the only thing he was known for. He sunk his heart and soul into all these other things that he wrote, but he's forever going to be known as the author of A Clockwork Orange. And I think that's always bugged him. I don't know if he's dead or alive by now, but you know, it's like Alan Moore, right? How many things has he written, you know, that he probably had put much more personal value into? And what's probably his most read work? It's not Watchmen. It's probably The Killing Joke, you know, something like that, which I don't think he considers his proudest work. It was a Batman story that he wrote, but I'm sure that that's what most people have read, if they have read anything by Alan Moore, is probably The Killing Joke. So, you know, you never really know. We put our heart and soul into both Black Ops and Common America. And we're glad that both are well received. We were kind of surprised that Common America was even more positively received than Black Ops, but hey, we're not complaining if people like both the books we're doing.
Zach, I hate to put you on the spot, but you've been doing like going back and forth between projects yourself, right?
Yeah, I've been mainly working on a kaiju comic, though recently Tiger King has made me reevaluate an older project. I had this concept. It was going to be a script, a mockumentary that was a parody of Jurassic Park. One of the jokes, for example, was they bought a zoo and they're going to retrofit to the dinosaur park, so they take shotguns to the old duck box and kill the ducks. Dumb shit like that.
And those are
and then it turns out,
like the dinosaurs are all like the crappy dinosaurs.
Yeah, they couldn't afford the license for T-Rex or Triceratops. So we have like Micropachycephalosaurus and you know, the weird ones no one likes.
Like Archaeopteryx and Dimetrodon and shit like that.
Diplodocus.
Oh no, even Dimetrodon's famous. Yeah, it's like, and the owner, by the way, doesn't even know there's dinosaurs beyond T-Rex. He just signs the check for the dinosaurs. And I realized this is the year to write it.
Yeah, because Tiger King is still like number one. Tiger King is still number one on Netflix. So I'm like, strike while the iron is hot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing to do. Is so our original plot for Wall Might 3 was going to be a parody of Goblin Slayer, and we had the summary for that story all worked out, but we were busy with Black Ops 2, and by the time we were ready to start on and then Common America, so by the time we finished those projects and we were ready to start on Wall Might 3, Goblin Slayer had kind of gone out of vogue, and then but The Mandalorian had come into vogue. And so Tim said, we got to get on that and be contemporary and strike while the iron's hot. So we reworked the plot summary to be a parody of The Mandalorian. That's called The Mogalorian. And it worked. I think it worked out even better. You know, I think it's even funnier than whatever we had planned before. So I think it was actually an improvement. And it's going to be hitting the zeitgeist because The Mandalorian is still popular right now. So yeah, ended up timing it really well.
It's really fun. That's all I can say.
I love that pun, by the way.
Which one?
The Mandalorian's a great pun.
Yeah, it was parallel thinking. There were like 3 other people who had come up with memes that were that used that same name. But I mean, it's like it's considered parody and satire, so we just took it while we could. And that's one of the reasons why we're phasing out Trump books. It's not because we don't like them. It's because that it's one of those things where you can make them, but there's a shelf life based on how contemporary it is. And obviously, he's only going to be president for 8 years at the most, which means that your time is limited. So it was one of those things where we could have gone with the Goblin Slayer premise, but in keeping up with the times, we have to keep up with what's more contemporary, which is The Mandalorian. It's been a successful series. I mean, season 2 it was announced, and that's coming out later this fall. So it'll remain topical up until we make it to that point. And but I think Mark and I, between the two of us, we don't really like staying too contemporary. We like to be able to tell a story that's that's removed from a lot of things going on right now in the world today.
Yeah, the Walmart books, they're a lot of fun to write, but I think in the long run they're going to be more like time capsules. They're going to be something that people look back at, and if they were there at the time, they'll get all the jokes and references, and they'll remember and they'll get nostalgic or however. But it's not something that's a person unfamiliar with 2016, with the election, with all those references. They might just not get it, and we understand that. There's nothing wrong with making contemporary media that has a shelf life. You just know that that's what you're making it for. But I think there's something a bit more rewarding about trying to make something that will withstand the test of time, that can be read 10 years later and still understood and appreciated. And that's what we think Black Cops and Common America are. There's something that people much further down the line will be able to pick up volume 1, 10, 15 years from now and still appreciate the story and not look at it as something dated.
Yeah, I love that quote from Doug TeNapel you put in the front. It was a really timeless quote.
Oh, that was Tim. Yeah, and it was really good quote that he chose.
Oh, yeah.
And it, I think you guys probably know because you've talked to SWC, but we've listened to pretty much every review that's been out so far for the book. But there is a lot of material in Common America that's actually pulled from personal experience. And so you don't have to know that in order to enjoy it. There's a lot of metaphor in there based on things that we went through. And I just thought that that inside front cover quote was actually the last thing of the book that was created. And it just happened to coincide. It was actually a tweet by him. Yeah. And I just thought, that's it. That's the inside front cover. So we just plucked that and put it in there. And I think that encapsulates kind of the message of the story. We, when Common America was first conceptualized, it was basically going to be our way of making political satire, but not connected to the president. And obviously that just transmogrified over a year when we started refining it. And the good thing is that Mark is pretty receptive. He knows I'm really manic. One day I think I have a really good idea, and he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And the next day I'll be like, no, Mark, that's not how we should do it. Here's a completely different idea. Here's where I think we should go. And for the most part, he's receptive to it, because basically what happened was I said, whenever we're doing these long car rides, he and I are like bitching and moaning about things that have happened to us. And it's like, why don't we just make this book about that? Like, I think that should be the theme. And he was able to kind of restructure it and rewrite it the last minute to fit it. And it worked. I mean, I think it's resonating with a lot of people. And many of them don't even know what's happened with us. They just see it. And they're like, this is just it's a good universal message. It doesn't matter if you're in on the joke or know what we're referencing or whatnot.
Yeah. So, I mean, Tim, he gets a lot of ideas very quickly. And I mean, so Common America is not the first time that's happened. Black Cops was originally going to be a spinoff of Walmart, and it was going to be it was going to be a spinoff of Thump, and it was going to be about Marlon Bundo, and it was going to be another political satire book. But then he had another idea, like, Mark, let's change it into an original IP. And it's like, okay, we changed it to an original IP. And then it was going to be a full-blown, ridiculous, spoofy comedy still. But then after I wrote a brief first draft of that with that treatment, Tim had the better idea of, like, let's play it straight, and the comedy can be that it's a ridiculous premise played straight. And that was definitely an improvement, and that helped redefine, the Black Cops, the book's tone, and especially the where we could take the book and the kind of things we could do. If it was a spoofy comedy, you can't really have the sort of drama and weight that we ended up putting into it when we played it straight. So it's improved our options and expanded our horizons on the kind of narratives we could tell. And that's also how we developed our rapport of working together, was that, so instead of, wasting time, me writing a complete first draft and then us deciding to scrap that entirely and then start over again, we developed this process of refining a story summary first, and then refining the page breakdown second, and then agreeing on that before I even start the scripting phase. So that way, I do a first draft of a script, and it's, like Tim said, like 98%, and then any tweaks happen during the art process, and that's how we were able to get things out so efficiently. That just comes from us figuring out, our cooperative process.
Yeah, it's really cool how you guys are so like in sync with, and you can really tell that through the books, I think.
Well, and we like it to be one of those things where at the very end, whatever happens, like the end product, you could say that we're both at fault. I mean, for example, he edits me on the art, and I kind of edit him on the writing. And I've always this is such a, oh my gosh, it's such a controversy. I always feel like the writer is more important than the artist, because I own countless books by artists I like, but it's complete crap. Like the writing is horrible. That the only reason I keep the book is because I studied art. I could care less about the story. Perfect example is the Ultimates 3. I love Joe I say Madureira because that's how it's spelled phonetically. But people tell me it's actually pronounced Madeira, but that's whatever. I love his art. I pretty much own everything that he's ever done in terms of sequential work, and I've studied him meticulously since I was a teenager. Ultimates 3 is horrible. It is one of the worst books ever written. I mean, Jeff Loeb, I honestly don't know how he got work after that, because he basically put in a reference to like incest, but everyone in the book thinks it's okay. Like, it's really weird. And I just thought this book is awful. But the only reason I owned that book, it was like $4 on Amazon because no one wants it. So people are selling it for dirt cheap. But I would never reread it. I only look at it because the art is so good. So at the very end of the day, I think that whatever Mark and I do has to be something made in tandem. It has to be collaborative. If there's a compromise made and people don't like it, then I think it's both of our faults, because it was a compromise made by two people to approach it one way. And luckily, we've had a really good success rate. Now, there are people, for example, who have reviewed some of our books, like Common America, and they'll be like, I don't like this because it's so compressed. Like, you have 56 pages and you tell this story so quickly. And it's like, well, okay, but that's fine. That's fine if you think that way. Maybe like Brian Michael Bendis, because he's so decompressed. Everything is, it takes him 6 issues to tell one scene. That's fine. But on the other hand, I saw no problem with the way Mark was compressing the script. I agreed with it. So that's okay. I'm not going to point to Mark and be like, this is your fault because you compressed the script. Obviously, I was okay with it because I drew it.
Well, that's why we do the page breakdowns. Is like, you look at those page breakdowns that say like this scene 5 pages or this scene 4 pages, and then you get back to me and like, Mark, can you make this scene longer, that scene shorter, and then we work on the pacing that way. So we agree on those sorts of things. But like what Tim was saying though is about the writer being more important than the artist. My attitude is that a good artist can sell a bad script, but it's much harder for a good writer to sell a bad artist. I'm very glad that Tim is a good artist, because I hate to pick on Jeff Loeb. The guy wrote Commando, and I love that movie. But I mean, Batman Hush is like, people buy that for the Jim Lee art. I mean, that story is awful. That's just a terrible plot, terrible scripts. Just, it's lousy. But that Jim Lee art is phenomenal in that 12-issue run. But that's why people buy, just like the reason people buy Ultimates 3 is for the Joe Mad art, not the Jeff Loeb script. So
there was a Marvel comic called Vote Loki. I don't remember who wrote or who did the art for it. The art was so bad it made me almost physically ill. It gave me a headache.
But was it good? Like, was the book good?
No.
Oh.
It's like it was the art and the writing matched in quality. It was political commentary and comics done wrong.
It reminds me about Garth Ennis's run on The Punisher. While he was doing Punisher, he had 3 different artists that I can think of off the top of my head. He had Goran Parlov, he had Howard Chaykin, and he had Steve Dillon. And all 3 of them are very different. But it didn't matter who the artist was. I kept on reading it because, I mean, for example, Howard Chaykin, I know he's revered right now as kind of a legend, but his art on that book was not good. I did not care. Like, the story was so good, I could forgive it. And then Steve Dillon, obviously, he had, God rest his soul, he has a lot of friends. But I remember that was the one thing that was going to stop me from buying Welcome Back, Frank, was I just looked at the art and it was so goofy. I just thought, I can't take this seriously. And then, a friend of mine said, just buy it. Trust me, you're gonna love it. It is kind of Punisher's. It's his modus operandi from this point moving forward is how people are going to know him. And sure enough, he wasn't wrong. Like in a way, Steve Dillon's goofy artwork played really well into the dark humor that Ennis had going for him. But it's stuff like that that's just a learning lesson in how, yes, the artist is important because it's a visual medium, but it's like what Mark said. It augments really good writing, but the poor writing can't really augment really good art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, geez, I've read some. So I mean, I've read some comics that usually they will put if they have a good writer for the first like 6 issues or the first however many it's going to take to fill out the first trade. That's where they get their A+ artist on that to get you into the book, like New X-Men with Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. I didn't like it as much as other people do. I'm not as big Morrison or Quitely fan as other people. But there are people who love them. They consider them, a dynamic duo, an A-team. But Frank Quitely wasn't on that book for very long. And then a bunch of other artists came on to New X-Men, and it was still Grant Morrison's writing, but with tremendously inferior art afterward. And but people still read it because they were hooked on Morrison scripts. And so they're able to keep going, even if they're kind of biting the bullet on the artwork. I mean, I did that with a lot of like Jeff Johns' stuff, like his Flash run. He had some very good artists on his run on the Flash, and then he had some really bad ones. But I stuck through it all the way because I was invested in his storytelling. But usually, yeah, they'll put the A+ tier superstar artist on for the first trade paperback, and then it's diminishing returns after that.
Question. Is there ever been a case where you've avoided buying a comic like trade paperback, where like the writing and art ended up being really good, but the cover was really bad?
Oh man, yes. I'm trying to think of an example. That's a good question because that has happened to me before. Where how they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. The reality is you always judge a book by its cover. That we can't help it. And normally the cover is better than the interior.
Yeah.
But there have been some times where it hasn't been. And I'm just like, no. And then I completely, regret it.
I've had that happen with movies a lot because there's a lot of DVDs out there where they put zero effort into the cover. Like it's like a Photoshop screenshot, but the movie is actually good, but you can't tell that by looking at the cover. I mean, a lot of times they will take like very good movies, like classics, and then they'll do a really crappy Photoshop job on the cover, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't know, like why is Escape from New York getting such a terrible cover when it's such a great movie? Like what is this? And there are times where there have been new movies that I haven't discovered, and I had avoided them for the longest time because the cover looked like an Asylum feature film that's airs on the Sci-Fi Channel at 1 a.m. And then it turns out that the movie is actually very cerebral and very good. There's a film called Absentia. That's an excellent slow burn, very eerie horror film, but you wouldn't know it by the DVD cover, which is just a woman covered in blood and screaming, and it looks terrible. So yeah, that kind of thing happens. But like Tim said, with comic books, the bait and switch is usually a great cover and a terrible interior. Squirrel Girl actually got in a lot of trouble in Japan because Marvel, what Marvel got what's that Japanese artist? Tim? He does not Gurihiru. No, the cover artist for Squirrel Girl's Japanese release.
Oh, Shunya Yamashita.
Yeah, Shunji Yamashita. He does those statues. Yeah, the Bishojo statues. He's a very popular Japanese artist. They got him to do the cover for Squirrel Girl, and it's a very attractive, cute Squirrel Girl. But the art inside is Erica Henderson art where she's fat and stupid and ugly. And the Japanese didn't like that because traditionally in Japan, the interior artist does the cover art. So you know what you're getting when you look at the cover. And the idea of a different cover artist and different interiors felt fraudulent to them, and they didn't like that at all.
The example I was thinking of with bad cover art was Superman for All Seasons. And for a while, I avoided picking that up because Superman on the cover just looks like a thumb. And he doesn't look like
Tim Sale? Yeah, Tim Sale Superman, he does look goofy.
Yeah. He looks really goofy on the cover.
Oh my gosh, you're right. He does look. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. And he doesn't look like that in the book for the most part. He looks like really, really goofy on the cover.
He looks like if you tilt your chin down, like you're trying to give yourself a double chin, if you do that, like that's what he looks like on the cover for that. Because I know exactly which one you're talking about. He looks really dumb. He looks more like the Kingpin than Superman.
And to
You
give
ever
Jeff
see
Loeb some...
like,
Oh, go ahead.
speaking of covers, I was thinking there's like this, these companies, they've been getting rights to the old Toho monster movies, and they've been making some really nice covers for movies that I don't think have been getting that much. You ever, where they used to just take, a frame of them fighting, Photoshop it, and try to make them all artistic?
Oh, yeah. So, one of the nice things, I was making fun of DVD covers, but that was mostly like a 2000s issue when they're doing the really bad Photoshop jobs. But there are these like boutique Blu-ray and DVD companies like Shout Factory, Scream Factory, Vinegar Syndrome, Severin. Like they make these fantastic special edition Blu-rays that have all the trimmings for these rare and out-of-print movies that have great restorations. But they also commission new cover artwork, which is like you're talking about. Like Scream Factory does the most amazing cover art for whatever horror movie they license, and it always looks fantastic. And so we're kind of seeing a renaissance in that now, where people are actually selling DVDs and movies by the power of the cover art, instead of just getting like an intern to do a really crappy, take a screenshot, throw a filter over it, and then just put it out there.
There was one for...
I remember, I think just recently somebody brought up again was the poster for Spider-Man Homecoming, and how that just looks like a terrible Photoshop job from the early 2000s.
It's funny. So the mainstream studios, the big studios, are the ones who aren't doing that. They're the ones who are still doing the crappy Photoshop ones. Like they make fun of like the Avengers poster art, where it's clear that like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans and all them were like, they had their photo shoots separately on like different days, and then someone just cut and pasted them all onto like a landscape, and they just kind of look like they're floating on this. It looks terrible. It's not unconvincing and awful. The lighting's off, the scale's off. It's just terrible. And that's from like a mainstream studio like Disney or whatever. It's just very disappointing.
Yeah.
Have you ever read? There's a really good book. I don't know if it's still up on Amazon or not, but anything by Drew Struzan. Like I think the first book was The Art of Drew Struzan. He's the guy who painted all those movie posters back in the 80s and 90s. So he painted all the, like for the Star Wars trilogy re-releases, special editions. He did all the Indiana Jones posters, Harry Potter. It's actually kind of depressing, because as you go through the book, he actually details kind of what happens along the way and what happened at the very end, where he basically couldn't get any work anymore because of kind of the streamlining of the process, and just take photo shoots and just cut people out and paste them onto murals and things like that. And he was like, I took all this time, like 40 years of my life was dedicated to painting figures and looking at lighting and getting mood and things like that, and doing it by hand. And then you have these people who think that the modern utilization of Photoshop is all you need to recreate that, but it's not. Like it's a completely learned style and technique that not many people can do. It's a really good one. If you ever get the chance to get that book, I encourage you picking it up.
Yeah. Mark, I'm glad that you're here, because I like going off of last night's stream you did on Satina. Like how everybody was talking about how they loved it and gave it like 9 out of 10. I'd give it a 7 out of 10 though. So you should have had me on there. We
could have had a differing viewpoint. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to spoil each other's opinions until after we went on the stream. And then, you can tell in the first 2 minutes when we all said we liked it, and we're kind of like, oh crap. Now what are we going to talk about? We can't complain about it.
Yeah.
So what did you not like about it?
Well, I know that you said one of you said something about like it's not laugh out loud humor, and I don't know, like I gave it a fresh shot, because initially it would have been like a 5 out of 10, because I didn't laugh once like halfway through it. I was just kind of like
mildly amused.
Yeah, like I think when you said sensible chuckle, for me it was more like bemused smirk kind of humor.
Yeah,
and like I don't know, I tend to forget that. Well, I mean, I just come off of watching Smiling Friends, the Adult Swim pilot by Psychic Pebbles and Michael Cusack. So those guys are like I was laughing out loud during that. Mike Stacklasa plays a character in that. Check it out. It's free to watch on Adult Swim's website. And like these are all like comedians or internet guys, Newgrounds animators who I've been following for like the last 5 years, maybe more. So like I was a bit biased going into Satina. It's more like cutesy rather than, you know, actually getting a laugh out of me. So, but I managed, and actually Psychic Pebbles voices the big fat nerd character in the basement in Satina. You know, the Melvin character. I didn't realize that because, I mean, it's been a while since I've heard him like scream. Like, I think that the last time he did like a screaming role was in like the Hellbenders cartoon that he did with Chris Oni. But Satina, I don't know. It's not exactly the kind of humor that I like, but it's a well-made cartoon, especially for animation students. It's a so I want to go easy on, you know, somebody.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, I looked at Satina and I got a sensible chuckle out of a few scenes, but for the most part, I was like you said, like, yeah, amused smirk, and maybe I'm just easy to please. I don't necessarily need to have a huge like belly guffaw constantly for a comedy. If something just kind of amuses me and is pleasant, that's usually enough for me, especially if it's humor.
Yeah.
Especially like horror movies. A lot of people's because everyone knows I love horror movies, but a lot of people's criteria is, did it scare me? If it didn't scare me, then it's not good. My problem is that horror movies don't scare me. I'm too desensitized. You know, if I put that as my yardstick, then I would never like another horror movie again. But so instead, I look at it as like, well, did it have an interesting premise, an interesting story? Did it have an interesting mood and atmosphere? Was it eerie? You know, did it, like those sorts of things? And if I was invested in the film and I wasn't bored, which is, you know, one of the big important things, then that's enough. That's enough for me to like it. And with Satina, it was 13 minutes. I wasn't bored, and it wasn't awful like the way like Has Been Hotel was, because we really ripped into that. But and you know, it was good enough for me.
Yeah. Another one for me is, you know, I have to be invested in the characters. I wasn't really that invested in any of the characters. Not to say that they were awful. I just really wasn't really invested in them. Yeah,
with Satina, I think I might have been more invested than other people because I've been following the project since she posted her student film last year, and I've been watching those live streams and learning about the characters and the ideas and the stuff, all the like story Bible and premise stuff that's not in the actual cartoon. So that stuff, you know, since I was interested and I was already invested, maybe I had a bias. So I was already kind of into it before I saw it. So I kind of like went in with this confirmation bias that I was going to like it.
Yeah. See, like the only thing I had seen from Satina was the just the student film, and I guess some fan arts. That was about it before I got into the main thing.
Yeah, well, Tim hasn't seen Satina at all, so he can't really.
Yeah, I haven't seen it at all. I've been watching anime.
What have you been watching?
Dang, a lot of new things just popped up within the last 2 weeks on Funimation. So I alternate between Funimation and Crunchyroll. Sometimes one has something that the other does not. But recently I've been watching Gleipnir. It's only 3 episodes so far, but I'm really liking it. And Mark, I know you were talking to Fresher Luke last night. I don't know where he got this idea that it's like graphically violent. There's only been one person killed in the whole 3 episodes.
I mean, I don't even know what you weebs are talking about. So.
It's so crazy. Like, I think you would like it, honestly. I think it's up your alley in terms of what it's almost like a Cronenberg body horror type thing.
Yeah.
But basically it's about this guy, and he doesn't know why, but you know how like people can turn into werewolves? Well, whenever he's under a certain degree of stress, he turns into a giant mascot. Like, he transforms into a giant mascot, yeah. And he has like superhuman strength and stuff. But then he rescues this mysterious girl, and it turns out that there's like other people like him who turn into monsters and stuff. But here's the catch: so he turns into this giant mascot suit, you know, like on a baseball field or whatever. It turns out he has a giant zipper in his back, and so when he transforms, the girl can unzip the back and pilot him. It's weird.
Bizarre.
It's so bizarre, but it's not played for laughs. Like, I mean, I think a lot of the humor, it's like when we do Black Ops, a lot of the humor comes from the fact that it's so absurd, but it's played straight. Like, This is just
Hey,
how that works.
Hey Tim,
I mean, yeah.
Yes.
speaking of anime, have you seen Neon Genesis Evangelion?
No, because
Uh,
I refuse to watch it because I've heard literally 1,000 debates on the philosophy and the meaning of it, and I hate that shit. I basically live in academia, and I hate academia. I hate philosophical back and forths where there is no concrete answer to anything. I'm very rigid when it comes to my worldview. I'm just honest. Like I believe in black and white. I don't believe in interpretations. I believe that if you're going to tell the truth, do it because objectively you're right, not because of anything else. And that's my problem with a lot of 90s anime. Is it's very much like up to interpretation, like, ooh, this is the meaning of that. And whenever I hear that, I'm just like, I'm not paying attention. Like it's either I know what the meaning is, or I don't bother watching it because it means that the creator doesn't know either.
budget killed it. They cut the budget, so he just said, "Oh, guess it's now ambiguous ending."
It reminds me of there's two examples of that. Speaking of the 90s, it reminds me of Fooly Cooley and the Big O. Both of them I really liked, and then the endings were just like, what? I just wasted my time. Like you guys didn't even know like where you were going with this. And I think the Big O is the most egregious example, where in season 2, you're thinking like, oh my gosh, all these mysteries are going to be answered, and it's just a big wah, wah.
Yeah, Big O was one of the big disappointments too, because they had originally made the show just to be 13 episodes and to end on that cliffhanger, and they had no solution in mind. Like when they created the premise of the show, they're like, the premise was there is no answer. We're not going to think about that. And then Cartoon Network just threw a ton of money at Sunrise and said, make a second season, but you have to come up with an answer. And they're like, oh shit. And we got what we got. Everybody's a tomato or something. I don't know.
Well, speaking of anime and short films, I do want to recommend this one. I just went back and revisited last night. And I revisit it every now and then, probably at least once a year. Is Poet Anderson, The Dreamwalker. Are you familiar with the movie Klaus?
Oh yeah,
Mark,
I am. Is it the Christmas film?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think our first animation station on the Bunderdome was actually us talking about Klaus. Yeah.
Okay, because the directors of this Poet Anderson, Edgar and Sergio Martins, they later went on to work on Klaus as, I think, production managers, or they had, I think, pretty big roles in that. And you can tell because Poet Anderson also has that sort of blend of 2D and 3D. I don't think it's not the character models though, because Klaus, they merged the 2D and 3D together. With Poet Anderson, it's more 2D characters on 3D backgrounds, but they still make it look really good. It's one of the best looking animated shorts that I can think of off the top of my head. It's produced by Tom DeLonge of Angels and Airwaves, Blink-182. It was about 6 years ago by now. It was to promote their album at the time, or this huge project that the album and 2 or 3 books and a comic book series were all based around this idea of dreams and guardians of people who fight against night terrors. But they take this, because I've read the book, and it's really just this kind of mishmash of kind of not very interesting sci-fi or world building elements. Doesn't really coalesce, but the short, it sort of chucks most of that out the window in favor of simplifying it into a, I guess, narrative that is kind of up to interpretation, but you can probably tell what's going on in it by the end. The animation, and for me, the soundtrack, I really like I like their music, and they only use one vocal track for the end. And the soundtrack itself is really great, I would say, in my opinion. I know that some people kind of, it's subjective for some people, especially with that kind of music. But yeah, I recommend it wholeheartedly. It's actually free to watch on YouTube too.
Oh, okay, cool.
So Poet Anderson, The Dreamwalker. It's really good.
By the way, Mark, I heard you like Gigan.
Gigan, yeah, that's my favorite. My favorite Toho kaiju is Gigan, the chainsaw chicken. He's the best.
so weird.
Did you know that according to like Zone Fighter, some shit they made, he's kind of a mercenary?
Well, I've seen actually I've seen every episode of Zone Fighter. Yeah, he also dies. Godzilla kills him in that one, so it's actually Showa era canon that Gigan's dead. But yeah, he's a mercenary. I think they actually set that up in his first movie, as like the M Nebula aliens and then the Ceetopians. They just kind of like they borrow him, I guess, the same way everybody always borrows King Ghidorah, is that they can just use these monsters from space and however they want. I liked his. I hated the movie. Go on.
I was working on a kaiju comic, and I kind of had the joke that they have a way of taming kaijus through putting giant chips in their brain, make them fight though, because good old WrestleMania parody.
Well, I liked.
And I had
Go on. You're doing your premise. Go on.
Yeah, and one of the ideas I had was it's a love load of things. I plan to introduce alien kaiju. Humans got the technology from aliens. They may or may not have used the technology to conquer planets in the past, or if it's just too much of a shithole for them to take. Excuse my French. I apologize.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I liked the Godzilla King of the Monsters film from last year. I enjoyed it a lot because they got the personalities of the monsters from the Showa era, especially. Like, they actually implemented them into their characterization in the films. They found an interesting way to, by using that machine, the Orca, which is, I think, was based off the Orca from the Hanna-Barbera cartoon. They found an interesting way to control the monsters within the plot. You know, I enjoyed that film a lot. I hope that there's more of the legendary MonsterVerse after Godzilla vs. Kong this year, which we still haven't got a trailer on, which has me kind of worried. But yeah, no, that's good stuff. I'm going to have to, work call, so I'm going to have to check out, guys. But thanks for having me on. It was a really good talk.
That's good.
Hey, adios, Mark.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Is that
right? Let's see.
Sorry, Tim.
Yeah, that's fine. We might be wrapping up in like 10 minutes or so, because we usually run this long anyway.
Cool.
I mean, I'm just going through my notes. Just one left for Tim. Do you have any thoughts on Scott Pilgrim?
No, it's another one I missed in that era because it looked really hipster to me. So I didn't watch it.
What about the comics?
No, same thing.
Okay.
Though it was funny because I think stylistically, the comics look pretty good, but I was always very hesitant about it because I think that the Scott Pilgrim style, it really lent itself to. It was like you can see an evolution of how like the Tumblr style originated, and I think it was an era of people who actually grew up on Scott Pilgrim, and it influenced kind of that Tumblr style, which isn't inherently bad. There's actually some aspects of it that I think are nice and aesthetically pleasing, which is why people do it. But obviously it's a slippery slope because I think from the Tumblr style came the modern CalArt style, which is just like, it's not just a simplification, but it's almost like a gross simplification to the point where everyone does it. So it almost looks lazy at this point. Yeah. So I don't really have any concrete opinions regarding Scott Pilgrim. I'm not an authority on it because I haven't seen it or read it.
Yeah, it's funny to talk about the style because I read recently that Brian Lee O'Malley, the author, he based as he was going forward, he started basing his style more on Osamu Tezuka's style. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of interesting that it's ended up devolving, I guess, throughout culture. And I don't know if that's like Astro Boy or Kimba style comes through in Scott Pilgrim that much. If I hadn't read up on it, I probably wouldn't have guessed that Tezuka was a big influence on his style.
Well, it's kind of like what's his name? The guy who it's like Hayao Miyazaki. Yeah, he had a lot of influence from Disney animation. And honestly, I think it took me a very, very long time to pick up on it. It's just I can't tell by looking at the works that they have any real similarity to each other, other than the fact that they're both animated. But you have these people who are like animation historians, and they can point out pretty concrete examples of where you can see the influence in the work. So I don't know. I think all that stuff is very fascinating to me in terms of how one thing leads to another as far as style is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do remember, like, I think Scott Pilgrim did end up having it had an impact on me at the time after I read it, which was, well, the last book in the series was 2010. So,
Oh
and
wow,
yeah, that was
went on for a while, didn't it?
yeah. But I remember that influenced sort of, and well, what's interesting about that is that I had already been writing a comic when I was 15, and it was like a couple of years after the first book of Scott Pilgrim, but I had never even heard of Scott Pilgrim when I was doing this comic. So I go back and I look at that, I'm like, this is like pretty similar to like, I guess, style and presentation, kind of. I don't know if I have this comic up on. I was going to upload it to Imgur if it hadn't already been uploaded to anywhere else, but it was called like Wayne McLean Controls the Universe, and it was this dumb. Like, it was actually done on line paper, like intentionally to give it that sort of high school scribble kind of feel to it. But yeah, it was interesting to see sort of. And I guess it wasn't that similar to Scott Pilgrim, but I sort of recognized some stylistic stuff there. I'm like, they stole my idea.
Yeah, and you have that a lot too. You have that. It happens with the arts where you have parallel thinking. You just happen to have more than one person who either think the same way, draw the same way, and some of that does bother me in the sense that there is this kind of subconscious through line that we can't put our fingers on that's actually influencing our design choices, our story choices, and things of that nature. For example, the primary thought that comes to mind is with the recent slew of independent titles that have come out through like Indiegogo, for example. Why are so many of them horror based? Like, I just thought that was interesting. Even something as fairly friendly as like Bigfoot Bill. Obviously Bigfoot is like a cryptid by nature. And I think in the first book, it's Shadow of the Mothman. So you have this idea of like cryptids. And then ironically, or coincidentally enough, Black Ops obviously takes place in a world with cryptids in it. But it's just a coincidence. Like, it's not that Doug TenNapel and us were in cahoots with each other trying to think of similar story elements. I don't know what it is that leads to a resurgence in one thing thematically versus another. And coincidentally, there was another book, I don't think they actually got off the ground, but it was called like Cryptid Core, where it was basically like, what if cryptids met the X-Men? And I'm just like, what is the deal with cryptids? Like, where did we get this influence from? Because thinking back, I honestly can't put my finger on it. I'm like, well,
I'm going to have to change my comic now. I was going to have a Mothman as a giant kaiju.
Well, yeah, and so you have in that cryptid core concept. I think Mothman was like their primary character. In our book, the Mothman is actually our main villain. You have Apex Moth, who is supposed to be like our Mothman. So I don't know where all of that is coming from. It's all just parallel thinking, but I would argue that there's something subconsciously that's affecting it. But it's kind of getting to the root of that. Like, what is subconsciously making us think in this way that is influencing our work? And that's my big thing with, like, when people accuse you of like being a ripoff or whatever, it's like, well, are you intentionally ripping something off, like cognizant about it, or is it just the fact that you bear a similarity to something else? Because there's nothing wrong with the latter. That's going to happen just because you only have so many different permutations of a certain genre or species before you start seeing some similarities between it and something else.
Has your art ever been compared to the style of something that you really hate?
No.
That's a good sign.
No, because I kind of avoid all the stuff I don't like. So I'll give you two examples since you brought it up a while ago. I don't like Tim Sale at all. I don't like his art style. But to give Jeff Loeb some credit, he's worked on stuff that I have liked, because I did like The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb, and I like Dark Victory by Jeff Loeb. And so I think the writing on that was fine. And I think that Tim Sale's atmospheric type of art was actually a pretty good fit for it. The other one I don't like is I don't like Frank Quietly. I know that he's like a revered artist, but he's another guy where I don't draw anything stylistically like him. So I think if anyone were to be like, "Hey, your art reminds me of Frank Quietly," I think I would vomit like right then and there.
Yeah, Frank Quietly's like All-Star Superman is probably one of my favorite comics, but Frank's art took a while for me to get used to. It just looks kind of grotesque, the amount of detail he puts into it.
Everyone is
It
pockmarked.
reminds me. There's this comic I read. It was on Freak Shows or a book, and his art style reminds me of it, where they show every detail on the face in the old photographs.
Yeah,
like everyone just photos.
Everyone just looks like they've had a bad case of acne, and all their clothing and stuff has like these just marks in them.
Yeah,
and
I think
there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who have who are definitely influenced by them, like Nick Pitara. He draws a lot like Frank Quietly.
I think whenever like a lot of detail is put into hands, that kind of gets under my skin too.
Right. And as time goes by, I'm actually trying to simplify the way I draw and pare it down to basically like basic elements. So I really hope no one says I draw like Frank Quietly. I would be like, man, I am doing something wrong.
Another bit of art I remember, just like off the top of my head, Zach, remember that manga that you brought up that one time on here, Pupa?
Chrysalis? Pupa, yeah.
Yeah. Is it called Chrysalis or Pupa?
I think Chrysalis.
Okay, because in like the version that you sent me was titled Pupa.
Yeah, but it's Pupa.
Didn't it get an anime adaptation?
I hope not, but probably.
Like, it might have been recent because I swear like I saw a clip of it or something.
A 2014 anime.
Okay.
God.
Yeah, but we had a long talk about that.
I feel like, get you, monster! Get!
Yeah.
I kind of... You don't yell, get it, a monster. You yell, get it, a raccoon, and you're garbage. I apologize, Tim.
Shoo.
Speaking of garbage, I want to mention it to Zach. Well, I mean, like I was watching this. I've been watching Better Call Saul on Netflix, and there's a scene where Gus Fring, the cartel, comes to the restaurant he manages, the Los Pollos Hermanos, and they start like harassing the employees. And the next day, Gus has to come in and like give an impassioned speech about like just making up like, you know, these men, like when I first started in Mexico, these men came asking for money and I had to give it to them. And they came back today, but I said, this is America and we do not cater to the people who spread fear. And I'm just picturing the same situation happening in McDonald's, like the one that you worked at. and then managers just say, like the employees being like, what happened there? And it's like, none of your business. I sell drugs. What's it to you?
Yeah.
Everybody just getting back to work.
I worked at a McDonald's, Tim, and among other stories, we had a person pull out a stun gun and fire it in the air to show it off.
It happens.
Yeah.
Craziness. Here's the funny thing. I don't eat at McDonald's a lot, but when I do, I love it. Like it's such a guilty pleasure because I'll typically eat at McDonald's when I'm on the road because it's fast. You can just stop in and get it. But there's two fast food restaurants where I haven't had any negative experiences. Knock on wood, because they could happen. One, Taco Bell. I've never gotten diarrhea at Taco Bell, even though I know that that's kind of the stereotype or the thing that we make fun of. And two, even though I've had bad service at McDonald's, I've never had bad food at McDonald's. I actually like pretty much everything on their menu.
You ever had the Taco Bell breakfast?
No, because I don't like breakfast. I don't eat breakfast. I only eat lunch and dinner.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yep.
I eat lunch for breakfast.
No, you can do that too. I like brunch. No, I do like brunch a lot.
Yeah.
But no, what I do is because when you're an artist, you sit down a lot. So a lot of artists die young too. I don't want to die young. I want to live to a ripe old age. So I make sure to do an hour of exercise every day, but I also basically control my diet. And so I skip breakfast. I eat a banana and coffee, and then around 11 or noon is when I have my lunch, and then dinner comes around 6 or 7. But typically, one of those meals will be nothing but a bowl of soup, because soup is around 300 calories. So I'm able to basically maintain my weight and kind of eat whatever I want for at least one meal a day, and then it's just lather, rinse, repeat after that.
Yeah, no, once in a while I'll fast for a day.
Hmm.
My brother does that a lot. He'll fast for like 3 days.
Jeez, holy cow!
Yeah, he's like a real fitness nut now, and like if you see any like pictures of him on like his Facebook, he's just ripped now.
Jeez, well, I'm not ripped, that's for sure.
Send me a picture of him, a new picture, because I haven't seen him in a while.
Yeah, he like I brought him to our local writing group once a while back. He's doing well now.
He's a nice guy. I like him.
Yeah, he is a nice guy.
I wanted to ask you a real quick question before I forget. How did you get acquainted with SWC?
Well, I've been following their blog since I think 2012, 2013. The blog that you used to have on Tumblr.
Mhm.
And I would read them pretty much every day. Like sometimes comment anonymously, and I followed them eventually to YouTube. Or I can't remember if it was their YouTube channel first, and then they had their Discord. But yeah, I've just been following them for ever since like before I moved out to my parents' house.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, they've I don't know, I've always found their stuff really entertaining and really pretty insightful at times.
They're funny. They're
really
fun. They're really funny guys, and I know a lot of people give them a hard time because they sound very contemptuous. But
yeah. Well, that's where their style comes from.
Yeah, I feel like their humor is more into it's in the same kind of insult comedy like Don Rickles or Triumph to Insult Comic Dog, where they're basically busting your balls, and you have to kind of read between the lines to see what their message is that they're coming through with. But what I always appreciate about them, even though I've only known them for probably a year, if not less, is I was going back to their videos in like 2016, 2017, and they never really said an unkind word about like me, or at the time I was, with Nurkish, and he and I still talk almost every day. But it was just the fact that I just thought to myself, well, I'm pretty easy target considering the stuff I worked on, but they always kind of gave me credit. So I was like, well, these guys they're not just out to get anyone. There's like a method to the madness in terms of their style and what they decide to comment on and stuff like that. So I think that even though they do insult people a lot, they definitely have principles, regardless of what people might think of those or not.
Yeah, I get the feeling like they don't like being complimented, because I think like the last time when they came on last time, and I was just sort of praising them, and I think it might have just been me thinking this, but they were kind of like apprehensive about me just like sucking their dicks. So I'm just such a big fan of them.
I think what it is they don't like that word fandom. Yeah. And so it took me a while because I was trying to understand their argument. I think their argument is that the word fan is so ill-defined that they're using a semantic definition for it, like a very strict definition, the root of fanatic. Yeah. And the idea is that you're so solitary, obsessed with something, that it determines a lot of what you associate with and what you're willing to put up with. And I thought about that, and it just clicked one day where I just thought, I know what they're talking about. Because, for example, if someone were to be like, Tim, are you a fan of comics? And let's say I say yes. And let's say this other guy says, oh, then you must be familiar with Superman 145, in which panel 5, the error that's present there is obvious to everyone. What was that error? I don't know. Then you're not a true fan. Right, and we've all had like an encounter like that, right?
Yeah, where the fake geek girl test.
Right, exactly. And it's like, I remember just after occurrence like that happened, I would be like, well, I'm not really a fan. I read it because I enjoy it. And then when I don't enjoy it, I don't bother with it anymore. But I think that what I'd like to hear is what their alternative to the word would be, because there has to be like a suitable alternative for someone who consumes something that's entertaining because they like it, but they're not beholden to it as with almost like a cultish idolatry,
Mm-hmm. I mean, you give that example of, are you a fan of comics? For me, the first thing I think of is, well, what comics are you talking about? Right. And if somebody says, are you a fan of Superman? I'm like, yeah, I like him. I like the character. There are some books that are good. yeah, I guess overall, I would. Again, it's kind of it's a strict definition that sort of. I like your point of what other word is there for like if you like something enough to buy the book or buy like merchandise based around it. So yeah, I think that I think that fan is still a valid term, but it's just like I think it's more along the lines of like tempering yourself, like
Sure.
seeing like riding the line between, or like leaning more towards fan and not toward fanatic. And I think that not a lot of people have the capacity to ride that line.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, come to think about it, if someone were to ask me, what do you think of Spider-Man?
Mhm.
If I just say, hey, I like it, then even that phrase on its own, even though there's nothing wrong with it, it's like stopping short because you expect that to be punctuated with a but.
Mhm.
I like it, but. And no one wants to hear that. Everyone wants to hear like a straight opinion. Like, what do you think of something?
Mhm.
So I don't know. I think having a new word substitution for something that's short of fanatic would be good. So I don't know. I like those guys. I think they're very insightful in terms of what they have to say.
Yeah.
But I was just curious because I saw them streaming with you, I think a week or two ago to celebrate like one of your episodes.
Yeah, our second anniversary.
There you go.
It was nice to have them on. Yeah, like I like to let whenever I have a guest on, I like to let them go on for a long time, as long as they want. I know that I think I mentioned this in the last episodes that Larry King has sort of a policy of when he has a guest on, it's all you have to make the episode about them. You can't like if somebody says if somebody went to Chicago, the guests you have on say, "Oh, I went to Chicago." You can't butt in and say, "Oh yeah, I went to Chicago last year. I bought like this and that, and I went to see this and that." And it's like, no, you have to ask them, where like their experience was, rather than give your experience. And I know that I've been like in like this episode, I've been saying, giving my experiences, but I don't consider this a formal interview. This is just some guys hanging out.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit different because, for example, in radio, typically once a month, Mark and I will fill in for our local talk radio, and that is definitely the rule. Is when you have a guest on, then it's the idea that basically they take the center stage, and you're just there to kind of lob questions at them, but really they're the ones who are giving answers, and you're not really opining. But you're right. This is more of just people shooting the shit, which I like personally. That's more of my style. Is okay, have a loose topic to discuss and start ping ponging, comments off of each other. I prefer that personally.
Yeah, this has really just been what
Hey, Tim,
Yes.
before I forget, I want to say this. Common America's design is fucking great. I love good character designs.
Oh, thank you. I honestly, so as we were mentioning earlier on, it's definitely our best-selling property, and I did some internal polling, so I just randomly picked a couple of people to survey from Kickstarter, and I was like, just be honest, like, what made you back the book? And they're like, I just like the character design. So I just told Mark, I said, okay, well, when we redesign the characters for Black Ops 3, I mean, we kind of know what to do now because, hey, these people are honest. They're like, I like it.
I like that. I like that she has the same color palette as Roger Rabbit.
Yeah. Well, not just that, but her costume is actually a mix of two different costume designs. It's Tiffany from Rival Schools, the patriotic theme, and then the overall design is based off of the 90s Sue Storm. A lot of people make fun of her costume because it is ridiculous. Like, if you look at that Sue Storm 90s costume, she had like the 4 boob window. But I was like, that was a great costume. Like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. And she did it without pouches too, which was, even cooler.
I have to admit, I'm a bit of a nut for Rob Liefeld, ironically.
I don't care. Like, that's not. I know a lot of people either love him or that's like a point of contention where it's like up in their craw. As an artist, it's just it's your goal to just make stuff look cool. Like that's it. And obviously, he did something right in the 90s because a bunch of people were buying his books. So more power to him.
I had a comic idea called Killer Whale, the Soldier of No Porpoise. A parody of like '90s comics, and I really, at one point, wanted to give him like a belt with like a shit ton of pouches and guns and knives,
Sure.
none of which he'd use because he preferred to bite people's heads off.
As you well
He was
should.
He was a killer whale turned into a human, not reverse. So
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, that's okay.
I say sorry a lot. It's a bad habit.
No, just don't do that. That's my rule of streaming or just talking. Just never apologize.
Well, I think that we can wrap up this episode if we got nothing else to talk about.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. Sounds good.
Yeah, Tim. Tim, if Mark ever wants to do a Bunderdome stream on Poet Anderson, tell him to call me up so I can vehemently defend that short.
Okay. Hey, I'll also say this: if you ever want to be on the animation stream, just hit up Mark on Twitter.
Oh yeah,
he'd be more than happy to have you on. They actually want to have more people who can talk about it. Carrot and Shtick, she's normally on with them, but she's been very busy lately, so they're actually down a member. And I think you saw last night, Josh had to leave a little bit early. So the more people they can have on to talk animation, the better. Like, he would love it.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. Well, sounds good, you guys. Hey, I put the link to that headphone in the private chat. Mm-hmm. So it's still available at Walmart, but I was right. It's just under $20. So if you want to get that, that's what I use for all of my streams.
Yeah, Zach, you use like the internal microphone on your computer, so you might want to check that out.
Yeah, I'm going to save that. Mm-hmm. Thank you again, Tim.
No problem. My pleasure.
And thank you, Tim, for being on here. I've been Tony.
I've been Zach.
And I've been Tim.
And this has been The Monkey Bar.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.